it's your fault, or are you happy with what you've done, or something like that, but I didn't know if that was too harsh.
No.
Yeah, go for that. Are you happy with what you've done?
I think that's quite nice.
Try it. Okay, I just want to try.
You saying it's my fault?
Yeah.
Are you saying I did this to her?
Yeah.
How can it be my fault? I wasn't driving the fucking car.
Don't you have anything to say for yourself?
I didn't push her in front of that car.
You might as well have.
You know, there's got to be order and control, and someone has got to do something. You know, we can't just live on love and empty promises. It doesn't work like that in the real world.
I ain't got the slightest bit of attention because we're too busy.
Well, someone has to put food on the table and bring the money in. We can't just live on love and empty promises. The real world doesn't work like that.
Okay, so the scene where Ben and Eri fight over the bed. This was our first written scene of the piece. We really wanted this scene to be full of heightened emotions, and the best way for us to get a script for this was to allow our actors to fully embody their character, envision themselves in their situation, and improvise what they would say to one another to get the raw emotion as well as some realistic dialogue. The cast were brilliant with this, they really went for it. We asked them firstly to just improvise what came naturally until we told them to stop. This sort of went on for about 3 minutes or so whilst I furiously scribbled down anything they said in their improvisation that encaptured the basis of what we wanted in the argument. I then relayed this information to Pippa and Sarah, and we asked them to do it again, but keep the particular lines that I'd written down in their head and say them at an appropriate time within the argument. After a few goes at this, we had some lovely points that were brought up in the argument, such as placing blame on one another. When they got a bit stuck in the improvisation, we'd help them out by saying things like, why was Flora at the office in the first place? Or why is it any of Eri's business, to try and get them to bring something out of our questions and help the argument along. We then stopped the improvisation and sat down for a moment, picking out the wonderful sort of natural lines they had given us, as well as adding any important things to the argument that needed to be said, such as the hint to Flora's pregnancy to Ben. After this rehearsal, Pippa said that she'd write a draft script from the material that they had given us. Before the next rehearsal, I looked over the script, edited it, changing and adding a few lines here and there in order to sort of have a finalised piece of the script for our actors to work with. For the next rehearsal, we asked them to read through the script. We then did an exercise with them in order to show them how the argument was in all its simplicity a power struggle between boyfriend and sister. For this, we got them to face each other at a reasonable distance, and every time they said a line, they had to decide whether that line empowered them, and if it did, they'd take a step forward. Abby actually ended up stepping forward more so than Ben, which is what we were trying to show, that Ben's arguments were weak and petty, and he didn't really have legs to stand on, and how Eri kept pushing and pushing him to breaking point until he finally explodes, and suddenly regains all the power that he'd lost throughout the scene. We then did an altered version of this exercise in which whenever someone stepped forward through the empowerment of their line, the other would have to take a step back, becoming weaker. And I think this really helped our cast members to understand the dynamics of the scene and who had power over who. We then did a few more exercises. We got our actors to read their lines with no emotion. Whilst they did this, I wrote down moments where it worked and where it didn't, and then relayed it back to our actors. This helped us find an appropriate mix of high to low pressure points within the argument. Another was the file exercise, in which Eri wants to see her sister's vital chart, so we got Dan and Abby to take it in turns at providing every method possible to ensure their opponent doesn't get the file. However, they had to stay off the floor and use chairs to move around, which is actually a method used by Frantic Assembly. This was to again show the importance of who holds the power. The person holding the file throughout the scene has the power. We then did another power struggle exercise in which we asked them to mime their lines. This allowed them to show their anger with each other through gestures and movements rather than the words. And some of these gestures we asked them to keep, such as Abby prodding Dan's chest, Dan walking away whilst gesticulating to the air in frustration. We then asked them to write down the chosen moments next to the lines that they had mimed it on so they could remember what we wanted them to do. This really helped the piece to stop being so static and to also help our actors achieve the heightened emotion that we wanted. Once the actors had learnt their lines, we decided to block it, using all the noted gestures, movements, distance from each other and emotions from the exercises. Abby actually told us that she absolutely hated the word cunt, and that when she hears it her blood goes cold. We took this into consideration and we wondered about audiences' reactions as well. However, we decided to use the word, asking her if when Dan says the word, whether she could really focus on her personal hatred of the word. So we brought in a bit of method acting to our piece. Her reaction to the word, therefore, was as real as it possibly could be, and she gave us such a long pause between Dan's screaming and her next line, which gave the word such an impact that we asked her to keep it every time, keep that pause going. Once we got it down, there was only minor editing involved from then on. For example, we wanted Dan to get as close as possible to Abby when he screams at her, and we asked them to put in a few longer pauses here and there for Abby to hit and cry into Dan's chest at the end.